And good evening. Tonight, Luigi Mangione, the CEO murder suspect, behind bars in New York City, the city where prosecutors allege he came to kill. This just 2 weeks after the targeted attack that ignited a massive manhunt and his eventual arrest in Pennsylvania. And now he's not just facing state charges, but federal ones as well. Tonight, it's his transport back to New York, though, that is grabbing the most headlines. The 26-year-old arriving in court this morning in Blair County in central Pennsylvania for the charges he faces in that state and on his extradition to New York. Mangione ultimately waiving his extradition and was immediately handed over to NYPD officers in the courtroom. He was then whisked away in a motorcade and taken to a nearby airport. Officials saying they wanted to avoid a media spectacle because they had a 5-hour drive all the way to New York. So here's what they did instead. They took him to Altoona Blair County Airport, where he got on a plane to MacArthur Airport and flew over there and then boarded a helicopter to New York City. Here, he lands at the Wall Street helipad, surrounded by NYPD officers in tactical gear and long guns, the FBI Joint Terrorism Task Force, and even law enforcement boats in the water. New York City Mayor Eric Adams making a point of being part of the perp walk, greeting Mangione as he arrived, the NYPD commissioner also there. The suspect immediately taken to federal court. It comes just hours after federal court documents were unsealed, revealing an additional 4 charges. Mangione retaining a high-powered criminal defense attorney. You see her here walking into court with her husband, who happens to be the lawyer representing Sean Diddy Combs. Will the star attorney couple handle this case together? We have a lot to get to this evening. We start tonight with NBC's Stephanie Gosk.
Luigi Mangione extradited from Pennsylvania and back in New York City today, flown in on an NYPD helicopter, handcuffed and shackled.
Police Commissioner Tish and I want to send a very clear and loud message that this act of terrorism would not be tolerated in the city.
The accused murderer greeted by Mayor Eric Adams and new federal criminal charges. 4 counts, including stalking and a murder charge that could bring the death penalty. That federal criminal complaint is on top of the 11 state charges he already faces in New York, including murder in the first degree in the furtherance of terrorism for allegedly gunning down 50-year-old father of 2, Brian Thompson, the CEO of UnitedHealthcare.
Was targeted, premeditated, and meant to sow terror.
The federal complaint unsealed today reveals new investigative details. Sometime in the hour before the early morning murder, Mangione was depicted using a cell phone at least once, according to federal prosecutors. It makes no mention of who he may have been talking to. The complaint also gives details of what was in the notebook police found on Mangione when he was arrested in a Pennsylvania McDonald's. The handwritten pages express hostility towards the health insurance industry and wealthy executives in particular. According to the complaint, an entry marked August 15th says the details are finally coming together, also adding the target is insurance because it checks every box. Another entry describes an intent to whack the CEO of one of the insurance companies at its investor conference. The complaint says Mangione undertook extensive efforts to identify the victim, place the victim under surveillance, and track the victim's whereabouts. The 26-year-old started his day back in a Pennsylvania courthouse, where he told a judge he would waive an extradition hearing. New York authorities took him into custody immediately and drove him to the airport, where a plane was waiting on the tarmac. Mangione then made his first appearance in federal court. He has not yet entered a plea.
Mr. Mangione appreciates everyone's support.
Before the charges were announced, his attorney said federal charges in a case like this are highly unusual and raises constitutional concerns, adding, "We are ready to fight these charges in whatever court they are brought."
Stephanie Gosk joins us tonight from outside the courthouse in downtown Manhattan. So, Stephanie, Mangione is charged with state and federal crimes. How do officials plan to navigate this?
Well, it's interesting, Tom. Tonight, he's in a federal prison in Brooklyn, but federal prosecutors made a point of saying that it'll be the trial on state charges that actually happens first, Tom.
And Stephanie, you've covered a lot of big cases in New York City, all over the country and the world. And we sort of know how these things happen. And it's not by accident, right, that everyone had cameras. Pretty much every place where Mangione was being transported to. There's a reason why they didn't want these images to be lost, correct?
Absolutely, Tom. We were all struck by it today. From the moment he was transferred into New York authorities' custody, we saw nearly every step of that journey that you so well described at the beginning of the show. With the moment he gets on the plane, then there is the moment the helicopter lands in Manhattan, and he is greeted quite literally by the mayor of this city and the police commissioner, and the mayor saying that he wants the message to be sent that you can't get away with that kind of act of terror in this city. But you have to wonder about these images from someone who has been, by some people, embraced for what he did, being paraded around New York City, whether it might have a different effect on people who see it.
Stephanie Gosk leading us off tonight here on Top Story. Stephanie, we thank you for that. For more of the charges against Mangione and what they could mean, I'm joined tonight by NBC News legal analyst and a friend at Top Story, Catherine Christian. She's also a trial attorney with more than 30 years of service in the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. Catherine, thank you for being here. I saw you nodding your head. Did they make a mistake in making this such a big spectacle in the way they brought him in?
I don't know if it was a mistake, but it was over the top. I have never seen a mayor, any mayor of New York City, be part of a perp walk, which is basically what in law enforcement you call what happened today, which happens all the time. There are, law enforcement like to show off, the person they've arrested. But I've never seen, if you look at the photo, the mayor of the New York City is basically kind of right behind the defendant. So I know it's a high-profile case. It was a horrible crime that he allegedly committed, but he's not the Oklahoma City bomber or Osama bin Laden.
Right.
I mean, one person horribly was murdered, and it was, lots of press, but, they have, elevated this to something very big.
And it's interesting you mentioned those notorious criminals, right? Because someone mentioned to me while we were putting together the story today that when looking at these images, it almost felt like a Batman movie, right? You had the biggest villain in the world had now come to Gotham, if you will. And I asked that because, there was this issue about lionizing him. And the NYPD commissioner, the mayor, detectives saying, don't make this guy a hero. He is not a hero. He's a killer. And yet they did this. It almost seems counterintuitive.
Yeah. I don't think they did it to, make him bigger than he was. I think it was, I don't want to say ego. It was just like,
we got you.
We got you. You did this in New York. You didn't get away with it. And here we are. I find it a little bizarre that the mayor was part of it, but here we are.
Does this affect his legal case in any way?
Well, what his lawyers will argue is if they ever decide that they want to argue that he should get a change of venue, they're going to say he can't get a fair trial in New York City.
So this could have hurt his case?
Yeah, they could say.
This could have hurt the prosecution?
Yeah, they said the mayor of New York City was here. How can we have a fair trial in Manhattan when this happened? That will be, they won't get a change of venue, but they will use that as one of their many arguments.
There's the initial case, which seems like a strong case of murder in the first degree. And then you have the terrorism charges there. Talk to me about the terrorism charges. Did they go too far, or do you think those will stick?
I think so. We're talking about the Manhattan case. They have a rock-solid murder in the second degree, which means you intended to kill someone and you killed them.
Yeah.
Rock solid. I mean, he clearly will say he's not guilty for whatever reason. And then they added this charge of terrorism to it, which the New York State Court of Appeals, other appellate courts in New York have really said it should be reserved for 9/11, the Oklahoma City bombing, the 1993 World Trade Center bombing. They said to the Bronx District Attorney, who tried to use it for street gang violence, a street gang that basically terrorized the neighborhood. The New York State Court of Appeals says, no, this is not for that case. That was horrible that a little girl was killed and someone was paralyzed, but this is not terrorism. So I don't see this terrorism, if he is convicted in state court, surviving on appeal, but often prosecutors overcharge in order to squeeze a plea.
We saw, as we pointed out in the beginning of the story, that Mangione seems to be building sort of an all-star legal team, right? He has a very high-profile defense attorney. Her husband is defending Sean Diddy Combs right now as he's serving time right now. He's being held before his trial. We've seen prosecutors win a lot of cases. They win most of their cases. But we've seen big city prosecutors lose big cases. Should the Manhattan DA's office be worried at all about this legal team? They
shouldn't be worried about the legal team. They should be worried about that terrorism charge. They should also be concerned that 2 blocks away, the Southern District of New York also has an indictment for murder, which in many ways, and the defense attorney, and I heard her today say she was sort of taken aback, the federal case he has to be more concerned about, because this is a very clean...
He being who?
He meaning Mangione.
Okay.
Because New York state law is very friendly to criminal defendants. Federal law is not. This federal, it's not an indictment yet, it's a complaint. He faces a mandatory minimum on the gun charge of 30 years. On the state case, the maximum on the gun charge is 15 years. Yes, the terrorism charge in the state case is life without parole, but as I said, I don't see that surviving. But in the federal case, he is eligible, if he's convicted, for the death penalty. So
what do you think
the federal
happens
case
here?
really is shocking to the defense attorneys. They were not expecting this to happen.
Is that a smart play, or is that a little dangerous because it can get precarious between a turf war between the Manhattan DA's office and the U.S. attorneys?
Well, I can the federal U.S. Attorney's Office doesn't care. They have basically said, in a press release, the Manhattan DA's office case will be tried first. So it seems like they're going to sit back and watch what the Manhattan DA's office is going to do. But Mr. Mangione, now he's stuck between a rock and a hard place.
Yeah. Is there anything about this case people aren't talking about enough, at least when it comes to the trial, because that's where we're headed towards?
Well, it's not a whodunit case. His only defense is insanity. And the question is, will there be psychiatrists who will agree that he could not form the requisite intent to commit this crime?
Catherine Christian, it has been a pleasure to talk to you about this on a very complicated case and a big story that is still very fresh so far. We thank you for that.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.